Welcome back to FreightWaves Now on this Wednesday morning. We've got our next live guest on right now, Michael Johnson, the Executive Vice President of Strategy at Redwood Logistics, talking a little bit about the future of APIs in freight and really just how to make all of our systems run a little bit better in general. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Michael, how are shippers currently? We are talking about a paper. Sorry, I need to introduce that. We are talking about a white paper here that Redwood did with our research team here at FreightWaves, and it was on APIs. And we do want to talk about that paper. But how are shippers currently, most shippers at least, currently benchmarking their transportation spend?
Sure. So I think for the most part, there's a lot of market indexes that shippers are subscribing to in order to sort of baseline where they're spending compared to the market. I think one of the drawbacks to the market indexes that exist is they don't give maybe a real-time snapshot of what transportation benchmarking should look like or where it's going. And so that's really the opportunity with rating APIs and where technology is helping to inform shippers on what their transportation benchmarks should look like maybe in the future instead of just what they look like based on historical data.
And so this white paper is full of a ton of good stuff if you go through and you break it all down, talking everything from capacity constraints to technology spend to the future of using tech as well. Can you give us a little bit of synopsis on some details about what you guys broke down?
Yeah, you bet. So I think the basis of the white paper was really about understanding how shippers are using technology today in order to solve some of their capacity issues. Over the past 18 months, we've seen wild fluctuations in the market, which have really hampered the transportation networks that shippers are managing. And so the white paper was really meant to encourage and socialize more information about how technology and data can be used to, arm shippers with more flexible capacity and with price discovery in the market that can help their transportation strategy.
Michael, can you talk to me a bit on your thoughts of how we can improve the RFP process? We've seen shippers and carriers both go to shorter contracts over the past year, given all of the fluctuations we've seen. But what are your thoughts on how we can improve this bidding, negotiation, this RFP process?
Yeah, you bet. So, from my perspective, I think the industry is really in the early innings of sort of an evolution from analog to digital when it comes to managing contracts. The industry would benefit greatly from a more dynamic contract-based system. I don't think the RFPs and the contract negotiations we have are going to go away, but I do think we can anchor them to more market-driven events with dynamic adjustments up or down based on market conditions that are mutually agreed upon. And it's not dissimilar to how the fuel surcharge program works for shippers and carriers to sort of hedge risk based on fuel prices going up or down. And so, in my opinion, if we move towards a more dynamic price environment, it would help pull down some of the tender rejections and the compliance and transportation network destabilization that we've seen over the past several months.
Michael, when we talk about the different aspects of technology, no matter if you're a shipper, if you're a 3PL, if you're a carrier, no matter what part of the industry that you're in, you have so many options when it comes to building your toolbox of tech that you can use for really any and all things that you need it for. Talk to me a little bit about the idea behind app fatigue or system fatigue, where you're bringing in all of this new technology and it feels like one new thing after the other after the other. How can you pare down and really understand what is going to be most useful to you and your business while also getting the most out of it without having to put your employees or the people that you're working with through that fatigue of having to learn and use multiple systems?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think it really speaks to the proliferation of new tech that we've seen come onto the scene over the past 10 years. And the industry is fragmented from a shipper perspective. It's fragmented from a carrier perspective. And now it's becoming overwhelmed and fragmented from a technology perspective. So to your point, I think it's really useful to understand what are the technology solutions that, provide value to the organization, but also how can they talk to one another and really how do we promote better interoperability between our technology systems so that we can streamline how we collaborate and work together. And the genesis of your question is really why we created LPAS to serve as sort of that neutral framework to promote better system interoperability and just greater collaboration between not just companies, but also technology systems as well.
You said that the industry would benefit from a more dynamic pricing model, and you mentioned a couple of those things in a more collaborative way, having systems that speak to each other in a better way. What else can be done? What needs to be done for this industry to move towards that dynamic pricing model that will benefit everybody?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we just need to continue to socialize the benefits of these technology solutions. If we look at, rating API as an example, it's just now coming onto the scene, and it reminds me of where some of the tracking solutions were 10 years ago, where today they're really table stakes for all parties in the supply chain, and I think that's where the industry will go. In 3 or 4 years, is rating API capabilities will exist between shippers, carriers, and 3PLs, and that's going to help streamline and promote the growth of digital freight brokerage. And also just streamline how companies work together today, because there's so much waste right now when you think about how companies are doing business or how companies have to use emails and phone calls, and the price discovery process is cumbersome. I think socializing that awareness and then moving towards more open conversations with each other on how we can collaborate and integrate is what we need to do.
Michael, when it comes to the idea of digital adaptation or the digital transformation, as the buzzword really is around this industry, are you guys at Redwood seeing any disparities between people who are being very quick to adapt and who are seeing this and are taking it and are running with it and moving forward, and maybe those companies who are seeing it, they know what it is, but they're not really using this technology and they're not really going out of their way to change their processes to use this technology in a way that will help them? So is it really just old school versus new school? And are those people who are old school going to be left behind as the tech revolution really starts taking off?
That's a really good question. I'll start with the shipper side by saying, many of the larger shippers we're working with, they're using tier one TMS platforms. And the benefit of being on one of those platforms is those companies have leaned into technology and they're enabling access to, technology and tools like rating API. And they're trying to integrate the ecosystem on behalf of their clients as quickly as possible. I'd say within our own digital freight brokerage, we definitely see disparity on the adoption side when we're working with carriers. And it's really, it goes back to that old school versus new school thought. A lot of companies are jumping on the bandwagon, if I might, and some companies are still clinging onto their own ways. But the biggest thing I've noticed just from conversations with shippers and carriers is how smart the industry is becoming when it comes to technology. And I think, the supply chain industry in general has moved to be extremely collaborative and more open-minded than ever before. So it's an exciting time to be here. And I think if we all continue to socialize the benefits and how they outweigh any risks, we'll see more participation and more adoption on the digital freight brokerage side.
And Michael, that's one of my biggest takeaways from this COVID pandemic is how our industry came together, worked collaboratively, integrated more than we were beforehand. I think that's going to be a takeaway that we have leaving the pandemic. What are some of your takeaways leaving this pandemic? We've got about a minute.
Yeah, you bet. I would say that I agree completely with your sentiment there. Shippers, carriers, 3PLs, everybody is trying to work together. And there was a lot of co-opetition, if you will, in the industry to hang together. And the way the industry responded to some of the instabilities we saw was so impressive. And so it's a great time to be in supply chain. Demand is obviously at all-time highs, which means the demand for technology to promote better efficiencies and network utilization is at an all-time high. And that's really the purpose for these digital freight brokerage tools, is to promote network efficiencies and better collaboration in the network between all parties.
Yeah, that's right, Michael. Demand for freight has never been higher. That means demand for technology has never been higher, but also it means that carriers, shippers, brokers, they all have a little bit of extra money in their pockets after this fabulous year, and it's going to keep going. We've got crazy demand going forward. Michael, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you both.